You're not learning anymore. You're just downloading. That's the brutal truth nobody wants to admit. Education, once a battlefield where the human mind sharpened itself against difficulty, has been hijacked by artificial intelligence. What used to be individuation, the sacred dance between shadow and self, has turned into mass standardization, a factory line of identical answers. Students no longer wrestle with philosophy, art of living, or the inner dialogue that shapes conscience. Instead, they crave instant gratification, mistaking borrowed intelligence for wisdom. Carl Jung warned that without symbolic thinking, the psyche collapses into shallowness. And that's exactly what's happening. Schools have traded depth for efficiency, replacing reflection with information overload. The shadow of intellectual laziness hides behind glowing screens, while souls disconnect from the archetypal journey of learning through struggle. People appear smarter, but deep down, the self is weakening. The result? Knowledge without wisdom, personas built on pretense, and an entire generation drifting further from individuation. But here's the twist. This collapse of education isn't just a tragedy, it's a wake-up call. Those who recognize the danger still have a chance to reclaim wisdom. They can step out of the noise, confront the shadow, and rediscover the art of living through symbolic reflection, practical philosophy, and critical thinking. The question is, will you resist the comfort of automation, or will you let AI reduce your mind to an echo? The rise of AI and the fall of deep learning. It's strange, isn't it? People once believed education was a slow fire, something you nurtured, tested, and reshaped until wisdom finally took root. Now, with artificial intelligence everywhere, knowledge feels like fast food, instant, easy, and hollow. Instead of cultivating deep learning through patience and reflection, students chase quick answers. They skip the very process of struggle that makes the human mind grow stronger. This isn't just about school. It's about the art of living itself. Without inner dialogue and reflection, we risk confusing information overload with actual wisdom. Carl Jung would have said that individuation demands wrestling with uncertainty, not outsourcing every thought to a machine. When the psyche avoids that friction, it becomes shallow, disconnected from symbolic thinking and the collective unconscious. Sure, AI can provide instant gratification, but it removes the meaningful journey of discovery. Imagine reading a philosophy book like Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. The real value isn't just knowing what he said, but wrestling with how it applies to your own inner life. AI shortcuts strip away that struggle, leaving only data without soul. Think about the classroom. A student once had to sit with a problem, maybe failing 5 times before the answer clicked. That experience carved new pathways in the mind, teaching resilience and critical thinking. Now, with one click, the problem vanishes, but so does the growth. Education becomes transactional. You ask, it answers, and that's it. No symbolic reflection, no archetypal journey of trial and discovery. It's like going to the gym, asking the trainer to lift the weights for you, and expecting to build muscle. Of course, this dependency isn't just academic, it leaks into daily living. People once found wisdom in silence, in reflection, or even boredom. Now they fill every gap with AI-generated responses, never pausing to connect with conscience or soul. It breeds ego inflation, a belief that I know when in truth it's only borrowed knowledge. Without patience, reflection, and symbolic thinking, the shadow of ignorance creeps back, disguised as information. The human mind becomes bloated with noise, yet starved of meaning. And here's the paradox. AI looks like progress, but it risks creating mass standardization. Everyone thinking the same, speaking the same, even feeling the same. Individuation fades, replaced by automated sameness. The more we chase efficiency, the more we disconnect from our inner life. If learning no longer transforms, but only transacts, what happens to the soul of education? Perhaps that's where Carl Jung's warning about the death of symbolic thought begins to unfold. Carl Jung and the death of symbolic thought. Carl Jung often insisted that real education wasn't about cramming the mind with facts, but about integrating what lives in the unconscious with the conscious. That's the essence of individuation, the slow merging of the shadow and the self into a unified whole. Yet, in today's age of artificial intelligence, we're moving in the opposite direction. AI removes the symbolic layer of learning, reducing myth and metaphor into plain data. The psyche, once nourished by archetypes and symbolic thinking, now finds itself starved, living in a desert of raw information without meaning. Symbolic thought is what allows us to see beyond the literal and touch the soul. A myth isn't just a story. It's the human mind reaching toward wisdom. Without symbols, there's no depth, only surfaces. Think about how philosophy and psychoanalysis thrive on metaphors. The shadow, the persona, the archetype. Strip these away, and you're left with intellectual laziness, a dependence on quick labels. The danger? Education shifts from the art of living into mechanical information processing, an assembly line of answers with no reflection. You can see it in students who no longer read literature or poetry, but prefer summaries or AI-generated breakdowns. Reading the Divine Comedy isn't about knowing Dante's words. It's about wrestling with symbolic hells and heavens inside one's own inner life. When AI replaces that symbolic reflection with neat bullet points, the soul disconnects. The human mind loses its capacity to transform suffering into wisdom. It's not just an academic loss. It's the slow erosion of depth, leaving a psyche unprepared for life's inevitable darkness. Jung warned that when symbolic thought dies, the collective unconscious grows restless. That restlessness emerges as anxiety, depression, or even cultural emptiness. It's like living in a world of mirrors that reflect nothing but appearances. Education without myth becomes flat, feeding ego inflation instead of wisdom. We already see this in digital dependence, where people know everything about life but have never lived deeply within themselves. Knowledge becomes cheap, while wisdom, once a priceless treasure, gets forgotten in the noise. The tragedy is subtle but profound. Without symbols, individuation becomes impossible. Education loses its soul, and humanity drifts into mass standardization, where students no longer think but only repeat. The psyche, cut off from myth, loses the ability to dream meaningfully. And in that void, something darker begins to stir, the dependence on external intelligence, which offers illusion instead of inner growth. That's where the ego begins to fall into a dangerous trap. The ego's dependence on external intelligence. The ego loves to feel powerful, and artificial intelligence gives it exactly that illusion. With instant access to answers, people believe they've mastered subjects without doing the hard work. Carl Jung would have called this ego inflation, a false sense of knowing that hides the emptiness underneath. Instead of engaging in deep reflection, the human mind leans on external intelligence, mistaking quick performance for wisdom. It's like wearing a borrowed suit of armor. You might look strong, but underneath, you've built no resilience of your own. This dependency creates an internal void. When the persona is shaped by automated correctness, there's no authenticity, only pretense. Think of a student who uses AI to write an essay. On the surface, it looks polished, but the inner life of that student remains untouched by the struggle of crafting thought. Without inner dialogue, there's no individuation, only mimicry. It's like outsourcing your conscience. Convenient, but it robs you of the symbolic growth that comes from facing failure and pushing through it. The tragedy deepens because the more people depend on external tools, the less they trust their own mind. Over time, critical thinking atrophies, replaced by a craving for instant gratification. It's similar to using a GPS for every walk. You eventually lose your natural sense of direction. In education, that means the art of living is replaced with shortcuts. Philosophy, psychoanalysis, and reflection fade, leaving only surface answers. The self becomes hollow, disconnected from its symbolic foundations. Practical philosophy shows us another path. Instead of leaning on automated answers, one could take up journaling, like Marcus Aurelius did in Meditations, or dive into Jung's memories, dreams, reflections. These practices cultivate inner wisdom by forcing confrontation with one's shadow, doubts, and archetypal fears. The act of writing or wrestling with a concept by hand builds something AI cannot: inner authority. Without such practices, education becomes just another performance, masking insecurity with polished veneers. And here lies the danger. When ego inflation runs unchecked, the collective unconscious pushes back. The shadow manifests in subtle forms: burnout, anxiety, disconnection, revealing that dependency has consequences. People may appear informed, yet inside, they're empty, starved for authentic meaning. Education built on external intelligence sacrifices the journey of self-discovery. And soon enough, this digital dependency casts a longer shadow, one that begins to haunt the very core of what education was meant to be. The shadow of digital dependency in education. When students lean too heavily on artificial intelligence, what hides in the shadows isn't just laziness, it's fear. Fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear of effort itself. Jung would have said that ignoring these fears doesn't make them vanish. It only drives them deeper into the unconscious. And so, dependency on external intelligence becomes a mask, covering up avoidance and intellectual laziness. The human mind may appear efficient, but its inner life grows weaker, losing touch with the archetypal journey of learning. Education has always been more than memorizing answers. It's been about trial, error, and discovery. That's how individuation unfolds. A student wrestling with a complex math problem or trying to interpret Shakespeare isn't just solving a task. They're shaping their own psyche. But when AI provides shortcuts, that struggle disappears. The symbolic thinking that once carved resilience gets replaced by algorithms. It's like skipping the climb up the mountain and asking for a helicopter to the peak. You arrive, but you've missed the transformation of the journey. Consider how digital dependence shows up outside the classroom. Instead of reflecting, many now run to apps for decisions, from what to eat to how to feel. The soul disconnect is subtle but real. Without facing uncertainty, people forget how to dialogue with their own conscience. Critical thinking becomes rusty, and the wisdom hidden in trial and error never surfaces. Education, once about shaping character, is reduced to transactional convenience, leaving behind a hollow shell of information overload. Jung would remind us that what we repress returns stronger. The shadow of ignorance doesn't vanish when AI answers our questions. It mutates. Students who rely on shortcuts may perform well today, but tomorrow they face crises of confidence, unable to trust their own thoughts. This hidden dependency creates long-term consequences: anxiety, superficiality, even depression. It's not just an academic cost. It's a human one, a slow erosion of symbolic depth in the psyche and a surrender of the art of living. Over time, this dependency shapes not only individuals but entire cultures. Education becomes standardized, stripped of archetypal richness, and society churns out copies instead of unique selves. The shadow grows, unnoticed, until it engulfs the meaning of learning itself. And once that happens, the very possibility of individuation is threatened, replaced by sameness, predictability, and intellectual numbness. Which leads us to the most pressing question of all. What happens when individuation itself collides with a machine of mass standardization? Individuation versus intellectual standardization. Carl Jung believed that individuation was the highest calling of the human mind. The journey of integrating the shadow, confronting the self, and becoming whole. Yet in today's educational landscape, driven by artificial intelligence, the opposite takes shape. Instead of guiding individuals toward unique inner lives, schools risk producing standardized copies. Answers are optimized, voices homogenized, and symbolic thinking replaced with formulaic repetition. The art of living gets lost in the noise of mass standardization, and with it, the possibility of true self-discovery. Education without individuation is like painting by numbers. You get a picture, but never art. When students depend solely on AI for insight, their persona is molded by external intelligence, not authentic creativity. They begin to echo what machines provide, rather than engage in critical thinking or inner dialogue. This is dangerous because individuation demands reflection, patience, and symbolic integration. Without those elements, the psyche falls into dehumanization, memory loss of inner wisdom, ego inflation, and ultimately, a disconnect from the soul. You can see this flattening effect in creative fields like writing, philosophy, or even psychoanalysis. Once, the struggle to articulate ideas forced deep, symbolic reflection. Now, AI can generate acceptable essays or interpretations in seconds, but they lack the soul of human confrontation. A student who once might have found wisdom journaling, sketching, or engaging with archetypes like the shadow or persona now risks bypassing that process entirely. The result? Knowledge without wisdom, information overload without individuation. This isn't just about academics. It bleeds into daily living. Imagine conversations where everyone repeats the same prepackaged insights, shaped by algorithms instead of inner experience. Original thought fades, replaced by intellectual laziness and instant gratification. Without individuation, people lose the art of reflecting, wrestling with conscience, and developing wisdom. It's the same as trying to live someone else's life. You may survive, but you'll never touch the fullness of your own symbolic journey. The danger is clear. When individuation gives way to intellectual sameness, society risks losing its richness. Instead of diverse voices shaped by trial and error, we get conformity, mass-produced by algorithms. Education without soul produces clever machines, not wise humans. And that's the tragedy Jung would have seen unfolding. A culture that prizes efficiency, but forgets the very purpose of learning, to awaken the self. And perhaps this is the very wound that forces us to ask, What has AI already stolen from education? And can wisdom ever be reclaimed? Education was never meant to be easy. It was meant to transform you. And yet, here we are, trading the fire of struggle for the cold efficiency of algorithms. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you wrestled with an idea until it burned in your soul? Or have you allowed instant gratification and digital dependence to dull your inner life? Carl Jung would say that without individuation, without confronting the shadow, you're not really learning, you're just memorizing. But imagine what would happen if you stopped outsourcing your mind to machines. What if, instead of leaning on AI for answers, you picked up a book that demanded your patience, your reflection, your symbolic thinking? Think of how the Divine Comedy, or Jung's memories, dreams, reflections could reshape your conscience if you actually walk through their depths instead of scanning a summary. The human mind only grows by facing resistance, and without that, your soul disconnects from its true path. So here's my challenge to you. Are you willing to reclaim the art of living, or will you settle for mass standardization and ego inflation? Wisdom doesn't come from information overload. It comes from inner dialogue, trial and error, and the courage to think for yourself. If this spoke to you, don't just let it fade away. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and step with me into deeper waters. Because the journey of individuation doesn't end here. It's only just beginning.